Hey everyone, welcome back to Note Lab Mode. You know how this works.
Mhm.
We pick a topic and dive deep into the source material. And today we're looking at something a little different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's called The Thing Explainer by Randall Munroe.
Okay.
And the idea is he explains all these complex concepts, but he only uses the 1,000 most common words.
So that's got to be a challenge.
Right. It leads to some really interesting descriptions.
Yeah.
Like, instead of the Curiosity rover, it's the Red World space car.
I like that.
And then there's heavy metal power buildings. And get
Yeah.
this, he calls cells tiny bags of water.
Wow. So it's like taking something really complex and breaking it down to the simplest terms.
Yeah. And I think it kind of forces you to think about things in a whole new way.
Absolutely. Like you're seeing them for the first time.
Exactly. So let's start with those tiny bags of water cells
Okay.
in the animal cell and bags of stuff inside you sections. He actually goes into a surprising amount of detail. Like he talks about the control area, which is like the cell's mini brain, and the bag filler that packages things up. And then there's the bag shapers that give the cell its structure.
It's amazing how much he can convey with such limited vocabulary.
I know, right? And he doesn't just describe the parts, he also explains what they do, like how they all work together to keep the cell alive.
It really highlights the elegance and the simplicity of life at its most basic level.
But here's the thing that really blew my mind. He mentions these strange boxes inside cells that scientists still don't fully understand.
Oh, wow. So even with all our technology and research, there are still mysteries hidden inside the very building blocks of life.
It's kind of humbling, isn't it?
Absolutely. It makes you realize how much we still have to learn.
And how much potential there is for new discoveries. Just imagine, every thought you have, every move you make, it's all thanks to trillions of these tiny bags of water working together.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
Speaking of mind-blowing, let's talk about the Curiosity rover, or as Munroe calls it.
The Red World space car.
Yes. His description of the rover's landing is just incredible.
What's so fascinating about that mission is that it's about so much more than just exploring Mars. It's about answering one of humanity's oldest questions. Are we alone?
So if we find signs of life on Mars, it means we're probably not alone in the universe.
Exactly. It would suggest that life could be pretty common out there. On the other hand, if Mars turns out to be barren, it makes the existence of life on Earth seem even more precious.
Wow. That's a pretty big implication.
It is. It really puts things in perspective.
And get this, the rover is actually carrying a collection of names to Mars, including ones submitted by space enthusiasts.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
I know, right? So your name could be up there right now.
It's a beautiful gesture, a way to connect everyday people to this incredible scientific endeavor.
Absolutely.
Got it.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how Munroe tackles a topic that's both complex and potentially dangerous: nuclear reactors.
He calls them heavy metal power buildings.
Yeah, and somehow he manages to explain nuclear fission in a way that I can actually understand.
Well, he focuses on the heat generated and the different types of heat, including what he calls special heat.
Right, which we know is radiation.
Exactly.
And he doesn't shy away from the risks involved. He even mentions those early researchers who died because they didn't understand the dangers of that special heat.
It's a sobering reminder that scientific progress can come at a cost.
Yeah. But there's also a potential silver lining to one of the challenges that Munroe highlights.
You mean the limited supply of the special metal they use in reactors?
Yeah, the stuff they need to make power.
Right. And while this scarcity presents challenges for space exploration, it could actually be a good thing from a global security standpoint.
How so?
Well, it might limit the spread of dangerous technologies if that particular resource is scarce.
That's interesting. So like a resource constraint could actually have a positive impact.
Exactly. It highlights the complex relationship between science resources and global security.
All right. Are you ready for a tour of the solar system?
Let's do it.
Okay, so in the Worlds Around the Sun section, Munroe uses these really simple phrases to paint these vivid pictures of each planet and moon.
It's amazing how he can create these incredibly evocative images with such limited language.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like he talks about how some of the moons around the gas giants are almost as big as our world.
It really makes you appreciate the sheer scale of the solar system.
And the diversity. It's just incredible.
And that's just our little corner of the universe.
Yeah.
There are billions of galaxies out there, each with billions of stars.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. It makes you feel pretty small.
but also kind of connected to something much bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. So let's zoom back into Earth for a moment and talk about Munroe's tree of life.
Okay.
He uses these simple paths to represent the complex relationships between different species.
I love how he shows that everything is interconnected.
Right, like you can trace your own lineage back through this tree and see how you're related to everything from bacteria to elephants.
Wow, it's like we're all part of this giant family.
Exactly, and it makes you think about your own place in this vast web of life.
It's pretty profound stuff for a book that only uses the 1,000 most common words.
I know, right? It just goes to show that sometimes the simplest explanations are the most powerful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about something that we all experience every day. Gravity. Munroe explains it in a way that's both simple and profound.
Oh, yeah. How does he do that?
Well, he talks about how everything is drawn towards the biggest thing around, which in our case is Earth.
So that's why we stick to the ground instead of floating off into space.
Exactly. It's all thanks to this invisible force pulling us towards the center of the Earth.
That makes sense.
And he uses this concept to explain everything from why things fall down to how the moon orbits the Earth.
It's amazing how one simple idea can explain so much.
Right. And think about it. This force is constantly at work, holding everything together, from the smallest grains of sand to the largest planets and stars.
Yeah, it's a little mind-boggling.
It is. Now, speaking of things that hold things together, let's talk about atoms.
Okay, so how does Munroe handle something as complex as atoms?
He calls them tiny pieces everything is made of.
Okay, I like that.
Right. It's very straightforward. And he presents this simplified version of the periodic table, explaining how all matter is made up of these fundamental building blocks.
And he still uses only the 1,000 most common words.
Oh, yeah. He uses terms like heavy pieces and light pieces to describe the different elements.
That's pretty clever. I never thought I'd actually enjoy learning about the periodic table.
Oh, that's the beauty of Munroe's approach. He makes it fun and accessible for everyone. And he doesn't just list the elements, he explains how they combine to form all the different materials we see around us.
So it's like a giant cosmic puzzle.
Exactly. And it's all made up of these simple building blocks.
That's both reassuring and kind of inspiring.
Absolutely. Okay. Are you ready to explore the big flat rocks we live on?
Is that what he calls Earth?
Yes. It's his way of introducing the topic of plate tectonics.
Oh, wow. So how does he explain something as complex as plate tectonics?
Well, he describes the Earth's surface as being made up of these massive moving slabs of rock. He calls them sea rocks and land rocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those rocks are constantly shifting and colliding.
Yeah.
That's what causes earthquakes and volcanoes.
You got it. He explains how the sea rocks, being heavier, often get pushed under the land rocks, sinking back down into the Earth's interior.
It's amazing to think about all that happening beneath our feet.
It is. And he even explains how water plays a role in this process.
Really? How so?
Well, he talks about how seawater gets carried down into the Earth along with the sinking sea rocks. And this water changes the composition of the rocks, causing them to melt and rise back up to the surface.
So it's like a giant underground water cycle.
Exactly. It's all connected.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about something that we all rely on every day. Electricity.
Okay. So for this, Munroe uses a water analogy.
A water analogy.
Yeah.
For electricity.
Yeah, it's brilliant. He compares the flow of electricity to the flow of water.
I'm curious. How does that work?
Well, he uses terms like carrier wanters and carrier makers to represent the positive and negative terminals of a battery.
So the carriers are like the little bits of power flowing through the wires.
Exactly. It's a really clever way to visualize the movement of electrons.
I see. And he even explains how some power boxes can be filled back up, just like recharging a battery.
Right. It's a simple but effective way to explain the concept of storing and releasing electrical energy.
That's great. And from there, he moves on to radios. Right?
Yes. He explains how radios use different sizes of power waves to transmit information.
Power waves. So you're talking about radio waves.
Exactly. But what's really cool is how he connects these power waves to light.
Oh, wow. How does he do that?
Well, he shows that they're both part of the same electromagnetic spectrum.
So light is just a really, really tiny power wave.
In essence, yes.
Yeah.
And he even explains how some types of light can be harmful, like light that burns your skin.
Ultraviolet radiation.
Exactly. It's fascinating how he can connect all these seemingly disparate concepts.
I know. It's like everything is related somehow.
It is. So are you ready to venture into the sky at night?
Let's do it. I've always been fascinated by the night sky.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's just full of wonder and mystery.
So how does Munroe approach such a vast and complex topic?
Well, he starts by describing our galaxy as the star cloud.
Okay.
And he explains that it's shaped like a plate or a wheel.
Right, which is why we see it edge on as that bright band across the sky, the Milky Way.
Exactly. And he points out other interesting features like the sun path.
Which is the path the sun appears to take across the sky throughout the year.
Right. And the world path, where we see the other planets.
Mm-hmm. So we've got our star cloud, our sun path, our world path. What else is up there?
Well, he also talks about the nearest star, which is actually a system of 3 stars.
3 stars. Wow. That would be amazing to see.
It would. And he also talks about the dog star, which is currently the brightest star in our night sky.
Really? I always thought that was the North Star.
The North Star is important for navigation, but it's not actually the brightest, Sirius. The dog star holds that distinction.
Huh. You learn something new every day.
That's right. And speaking of spectacular events...
You mean star death?
Yes. It's his term for when a star reaches the end of its life.
Okay. And what happens then?
Well, some stars explode as supernovas, while others collapse into black holes.
Black holes. Those are the things that suck everything in, right? Even light.
Well, that's the popular conception. And while it's simplification, it does capture the essence of these incredibly dense objects.
It's hard to even imagine something with that much gravity.
It is. It challenges our understanding of space and time and the nature of reality.
Wow. Okay. I think we need to come back down to Earth for a moment.
Perhaps we can explore Munroe's take on some everyday objects.
Like washing machines and cameras?
Perfect. Munroe's descriptions of these devices are both insightful and humorous.
Okay. So what does he call a washing machine?
He calls it a box that makes clothes smell better.
I love it.
Right, and he explains how they work using words like clothes pusher and water mover.
It's amazing how he can make something as mundane as a washing machine sound fascinating.
He has a real knack for that.
Yeah.
His explanation of cameras is equally engaging.
How does he describe those?
Well, he talks about how they use light benders to focus light and create images.
Light benders. So that's his term for lengths.
Exactly. And he even mentions those old cameras that use light paper to capture the images.
Oh, right. The ones before digital cameras.
Yes. It's a fascinating glimpse into the evolution of technology.
It is. So what else does he cover?
Well, he also talks about those shape checkers we use to unlock doors in cars.
Keys?
Yes. But what's interesting is how he highlights the societal implications of keys.
What do you mean?
Well, he explains that they're not just about physical security, they're also about controlling access and creating distinctions between people.
Like who's allowed in and who's not.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important point about how technology can be used to reinforce social hierarchies.
It's definitely something to think about.
Technology is never neutral. It always carries with it social and political baggage.
So even something as simple as a key can have these deeper implications.
Absolutely. And Munroe does a great job of unpacking that baggage, even while using this deceptively simple language.
It's a reminder that clear communication isn't just about making things easier to understand. It's also about revealing hidden complexities.
Well said. Now, speaking of critical thinking...
Munroe's explanation of the U.S. Constitution is particularly insightful.
It is. He calls it the law paper for a group of states.
Okay. And how does he break down something as complex as the Constitution?
Well, he talks about the lawmakers, the top law deciders, and the 10 changes.
Which is the Bill of Rights.
Exactly. And he even explains that part about counting people, which used to include a rule about how to count slaves.
Right. It's a reminder of the dark side of our history.
Absolutely. But it's important to acknowledge those parts of our past.
I agree. So even something as complex and controversial as the Constitution can be made understandable.
That's Munroe's point. He encourages us to engage with these difficult issues, to ask questions, and to never take things at face value.
Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive into the Thing Explainer, there's one more section I want to talk about. It's the one about those massive boats that go into the sea.
Oh, yeah. The ones with the machines for burning cities.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
But it's also fascinating how he explains their design and purpose. You wouldn't think you could describe something like that using simple words.
It's really impressive how he can break down such complex topics, and it's interesting how he highlights the shift in thinking about these weapons.
In what way?
Well, he mentions how a lot of them have been deactivated as part of disarmament agreements.
So it's like we're moving away from that kind of world-ending technology.
It seems like there's this growing recognition that we need to control these incredibly powerful weapons.
Right, and find more peaceful solutions.
Exactly. Okay, on a lighter note, what about Munroe's take on tall buildings?
He calls them shared space houses.
I love that. And he gives this surprisingly detailed explanation of how elevators work.
Oh, yeah. What did he call them?
Lifting rooms.
Makes sense.
Right. And he even explains those safety features that prevent the room from falling if something goes wrong.
I never really thought about how those work. But it's pretty ingenious.
It is. And then he talks about the challenge of crossing large gaps.
So bridges.
Yep. He calls them tall roads, and he explains the principles of suspension bridges.
With all the strong lines and hanging roads.
Exactly. And he even connects the design of bridges back to the concept of gravity.
How so?
Well, he explains that engineers have to carefully consider the Earth's pull to make sure the bridges can handle the weight.
It's amazing how much thought goes into something we take for granted, like driving over a bridge.
It is. It's a good reminder that the world around us is shaped by human ingenuity.
And our understanding of the laws of nature.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the core of the thing explainer.
It's all about making these complex ideas accessible to everyone.
Right. That's it. It's about fostering curiosity and wonder about the world around us.
So what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this book?
I think it's the idea that you don't need fancy jargon or complicated explanations to understand even the most difficult concepts.
Right. Sometimes all it takes is a simple explanation.
Exactly, and a willingness to see things in a new way.
And Munroe definitely has a talent for finding those simple explanations, like calling a nuclear reactor a heavy metal power building.
It's brilliant. It makes learning fun and engaging.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And hopefully we've sparked some curiosity in our listeners.
I hope so. And if there's one thing I want them to take away from this deep dive, it's this. Never stop asking questions. Never stop exploring.
The world is full of amazing things, just waiting to be discovered.
And sometimes the simplest explanations can be the most profound.
So true. Well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time on Note Lab Mode.